Cool. Thank you. Paper. We're good. It's good. If you wait, actually, can we turn it this way a little more? So
it's not centered, but cool.
Okay.
Artistic interpretation.
Sure. Sounds good. Okay. Thank you. Can you close the door? It's very cold. All right. We are going to get started in a little bit. Just turned 2:00. So if you are watching... Ooh, my chair is turning. If you're watching live, if you guys could just make a note in the chat box so I know who is here. And then those of you who are not able to join us live right now, you obviously can watch this video later and update your notes. Or submit your notes, I should say. We're not updating. So if you are joining and watching, just please type in the chat box who's here. I see Caroline. Take water. Taya, Eva. Okay, cool. So to repeat the instructions from Schoology, what you guys need to have out when you're watching this video is your Bible, whether that be physical copy like I have here, or on Bible Gateway or something like that. Also, you'll have your notes, which look, well, I have my key over here, so mine look like this, but yours are going to look different. And you are going to be following along as we go over this together. If there's ever a time where something is confusing, or you have follow-up questions, or if I go too fast, that's what the chat box is for, is to say, hey, slow down, or can you repeat that, or I'm still confused on this part, because we want you to understand for when we take the Ruth test in May. So that is what we're going to do. You guys asked really good questions. No offense to the seniors, but I think you guys went a little deeper than they did, which is awesome. So we're going to go over all of those today. But first, obviously, I'm going to read through chapter 3 and and try not to interrupt myself while we do that. So we'll start the chapter doing just reading through it together. On your notes, there are no questions. Like I didn't write like number 1, number 2. It just goes by the verses. So sometimes there's a question, 2 questions on one verse. And then sometimes, a bunch of verses are skipped. So you'll just need to follow along based on the verses because there's no questions. So if you want to number them for yourself, that's fine. Another reminder for instructions. You need to use a different color for your notes. So some of you guys would bold the question and then put your answer in non-bold. That's okay too, actually, but make sure that it is not the same font and that it's not red either. Make sure that it is a different color or that is a different bolded or not. So, and then once we are done with this video, you will then submit your notes to Schoology. You have until tomorrow at 3:00 to do that, since we will be done before 3:00 today. So that is what you're going to be doing. Those instructions are also on the document and on Schoology. So hopefully that makes sense. I see like 4 or 5 of you now, which is great. So we are going to go ahead and get started in reading through chapter 3. Okay, so in my Bible, I have an ESV version. It says Ruth and Boaz at the threshing floor, and we'll talk about what the threshing floor is in a second. Okay, then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her being Ruth, my daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young woman you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. And she replied, all that you say I will do. Verse 6, so she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. She did exactly what Naomi said. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and... I lost my place. And behold, a woman lay at his feet. I just think it's funny. There's an exclamation point in the text in my version. He said, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. And he said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, and that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning. So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, let it not be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. And he said, bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out. So now he's talking to Ruth. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. So she's literally carrying her dress like this, like with stuff in it. And then she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, how did you fare, my daughter? Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. And I think that's kind of cute. She replied, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but settle the matter today. Okay, so there's a lot there. Sometimes the book of Ruth is pretty straightforward, and sometimes it's kind of confusing with all of these references, things that might even seem creepy or definitely different than how we function today in this world, in this generation. So we will talk about all those things. And when we understand them, it gives us better context in how to learn what God's doing with the story and how we can even apply it to us as well. So we are going to start with verse 1. Naomi mentions something about rest. So is she preparing to die is the question. What is Naomi talking about here? She says, should I not seek rest for you that it may be well with you? Is she saying, hey, I'm going to die. I need to figure out your situation. That's not really implied. I mean, Naomi's old, but it's not like she's going to keel over tomorrow. When she says rest, she is referring to permanent rest for Ruth. Realizing their situation cannot continue like this forever. Just going out and gleaning in the fields and hoping that people take pity on them. You know, Boaz has been super nice, but we're not really sure how long that's going to continue or even how long necessarily that it has been. We know it's at the end of the harvest. So we know it's been, some time, maybe a few months or so. But regardless, Naomi is saying we got to figure out something. Her very, very next line, her next sentence to Ruth is about Boaz. So in Naomi's mind, Boaz has something to do with Naomi's plan for Ruth to have permanent rest, where she actually has a real life ahead of her, like a full life, a satisfying life, not one where it's hand to mouth, hoping you have enough food for the day. So she, being Naomi, is essentially preparing Ruth to ask Boaz in this Hebrew traditional culture, in the law of the kinsman redeemer, to redeem them, to be their helper, to get them out of this poverty, get them out of this terrible situation. So there's something I'm going to write here that we will refer to. I'm going to make sure I actually spell it correctly. Called levirate marriage. I want to make sure I spell it right. Nope. Oh, yes, I did. And you guys will write this down, either this question or another one. But this is where this term kinsman or guardian redeemer comes from. This Sharpie is not great. Okay, so Naomi is essentially preparing Ruth to ask Boaz to redeem her, and all that entails. That is the concept of a levirate marriage. That term comes from the Latin word levire, which means husband's brother. So again, we've referenced this before, but we'll reiterate it, what this actually means. So when a man dies and then he is left with a widow, she really has no means of providing for her, especially if she has no sons that can take care of her and continue on the family name. She's kind of just out of luck. And that's what we have seen with Naomi and Ruth thus far. We've talked about that a whole bunch. So this term is essentially to protect the woman who is now a widow, instead of throwing her out, to just be poor and try to fend for herself for the rest of her life and die without a family or without a name or without protection or provision. Because again, like we talked about, it's not like she can go out and get a job and start hustling and making money for herself. That's not how that worked. So in order to stay loyal to them and stay committed with this covenant of God's promises to the family that God had given them, it would be the duty of the brother or some relative to then marry that woman. Now, it would hopefully be someone who is not currently married. Polygamy wasn't necessarily outlawed at the time, but it was not really looked at necessarily favorably. And if we read the Old Testament stories, it did not go well, literally ever. So we have to keep that in mind. Yeah, but they would be essentially in this covenant relationship to the family and saying, I will take on all of the things that you have, your losses, your debts, if you have cattle or if you have land that now has been taken back by the government that needs to be bought back so that we can actually live on it or use it. Any of those things, the family that you might have. So in this case, whoever is the redeemer for Ruth will also have to take in Naomi, of course. And that's what that means. So it is a way for essentially women to be protected. It's one of God's laws to protect women, and there are a lot of them in this ancient culture where women sometimes were kind of like not really viewed as human beings. God would care for them and protect them with these types of laws. And so for someone who's actually following Jewish law, they would want to take this seriously. Now, since we know this is in the time of Judges, not everyone is actually taking stuff seriously. Not everyone is actually following God's commands. You just kind of got to hope that you find someone with godly character. Boaz is shown to have godly character. Naomi is trying to be a matchmaker and have Ruth be set up with this godly man, Boaz, who actually is a redeemer. So she sees hope in the situation like we talked about from chapter 2. So that was a lot, and we'll reference back to that a bit more. But I really just did want to get that out of the way since a lot of you guys did ask, hey, what is Naomi talking about? This whole chapter is set up in verse 1 and verse 2. That's what's going on. Naomi is thinking ahead for how Boaz might be their redeemer. Okay, so then we get to this concept of winnowing, threshing floor. Boaz is on the threshing floor. Go see him on the threshing floor, etc. What is this stuff? So from Wikipedia, winnowing is this process. If we were in class, I would ask, anyone know? But I'm not with you guys, and I'm sad. So maybe some of you know, and that's awesome. But it is a harvesting term. So winnowing is what comes after threshing. So we have the gleaning. Actually, I'm just going to write these down. Sorry, this pen is so terrible. So we know about gleaning already. That's what Ruth was doing in the fields, and so were the other people that were there in the fields. So we got gleaning, and then we go to threshing, and then we go to winnowing. These are strange words we don't really use that much because we don't have to make our own grain and bread. We just go to the store and buy the bread. But this is what they do. And obviously all this is processed and stuff now. People don't really do this except for maybe in rural kind of societies or towns or whatever. But this went up until the 19th century, even early America, they would do this. So gleaning is getting the stuff, from the stalks, the wheat grain stalks. And then threshing is essentially kind of pounding the stalks against stone. I guess cows will sometimes step on it, kind of like mushing grapes for wine, I guess, to try to get out the little things that have the grain inside of them. And then after that process, this winnowing process, is that you would separate the husk from the seeds. And the seeds is what you use, obviously, to make bread or things like that, and, to plant more. And so if you guys have ever picked a dandelion, you blow it into the air and it just goes away because it's so light, the wind just carries it off really easily. That's the same thing with separating, they say, the wheat from the chaff. That's a terminology used in scripture often for metaphors, that even Jesus uses that metaphor. And so the chaff is the stuff that just gets blown away. It's just nothingness. It goes away, and then the grain is what you actually want to eat and what you make into food. That is heavier, and that will fall on the ground. And so that is what this process is. So the threshing floor, I'm gonna draw probably a very ugly picture of what this is. Threshing floor. So often it was kind of this circular area where then all these people would be doing this, all the workers. Boaz is there. And it wasn't an enclosed space necessarily, with doors, because you have to use the wind. The wind has to be able to blow through and get rid of the chaff. So there would be covering those still, for the heat. It's friggin' hot over there. So, like I said, really bad drawing. That would be the covering, and then all the people are on the threshing floor here. So it's open. It's not this enclosed space. So when Ruth goes to see Boaz, it's not she's sneaking into a locked room like a criminal. It's open. And often, because it is so open, and because, this process of getting the grain to make bread and to make other things, at the time, that's a long process. You do it for months and months and months until you harvest it. And this is a celebration that they're having at the end of the harvest. often people would try to come and steal the grain that they had gotten. So people the men who had done the harvesting would stay on the threshing floor. And so Boaz, he's the owner of the field. Boaz is sleeping there somewhere. So he's not sleeping. I think someone else asked, like, why is he sleeping on a pile of grain instead of a bed? Because he's got money. He's not sleeping on the grain. He's sleeping near the grain. So he's sleeping there, probably with a couple other men too, who were harvesters, to make sure that the grain is not stolen. Because it could be. If no one was there, you could just come and just take it because it's such an open area. So hopefully that makes sense. Those are really good questions, but it is like a matter of, we don't do this stuff. It's not in our lexicon of words of things that we do. Just like, the word texting wouldn't be in their lexicon either. So stuff like that. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. The threshing floor is where they do this process of getting the grain. So on that note, so that is verse 2 also, and this is also about verse 2. How would Naomi know Boaz's schedule? How did she know where he was going to be? Exactly because of that reason. It was the end of the harvest. This is such a normal practice, knowing that Boaz is a man of character who actually cares about his workers and cares about the field in this process. Odds are he's going to be there. He is the owner of the field, so he would be there as well. So Naomi is assuming that, and Naomi's saying, hey, he's going to be there. It's the end of the harvest. There's a celebration going on. Go down and go see him. So that is how Naomi knows where Boaz is going to be. So that's a pretty quick answer. They were going to have a celebration, kind of like even now at a normal job. Once someone has some big job or like task that the company accomplished, there's sometimes a party, like a work party afterwards, like celebrating what we've accomplished. That's exactly what they're doing, just with grain and not in an office building. We're gonna take a pause for a second. That was just verses 1 and 2. Not all of them are gonna take that long, but we'll just check in to see if there's any confusion about what winnowing is, what threshing is, what gleaning is, how Naomi knew where Boaz was gonna be, or about sleeping on grain, or any of that other stuff. I'll take a sip of water and you guys can let me know in the chat box if there's anything that you need clarifying. Okay, looks like you guys don't have any questions. So we're on to verse 3, where Naomi is telling her to go see him and go see him when he is like laying down to go to sleep until he like goes to sleep. Yeah. And then uncover his feet and this weird stuff. So verse 3, the question for that is, why did Naomi want Ruth to go to his room and watch him sleep? Isn't it creepy that she wants Ruth to watch him sleep without him knowing? If Naomi was asking Ruth to go watch him sleep without him knowing, yes, that would be creepy, but that's not what she's asking him to do. So if you want to, you can go ahead and answer that way. It would be creepy. But that's not what she's asking Ruth to do. She's asking Ruth to do something different, not just be creepy and watch him sleep. Makes sense, though. Reading that, text in 2020, I understand why you would think that. But luckily, that's not what's happening. So we'll talk about what's happening. So she, again, is not wanting him to go to his room. It's not really a room. We just talked about that process. What Naomi was asking Ruth to do, sure, was a little unconventional and maybe even a little scheming, but it was not inappropriate. It wasn't she was necessarily asking her to, do something sketchy. Some scholars imply oh, Naomi wanted Ruth to go down and sleep with Boaz so that he would impregnate her and then he would have to marry her. Okay, that's reading a whole lot into the text, but whatever. That didn't happen, regardless of what Naomi's intentions were. But what we do know Naomi's intentions are, full stop, is that she wants Ruth to let Boaz know he's a redeemer and that she's interested. That's what we do know for sure, because that's what Naomi keeps talking about. So the point being is, she was asking her to go down in the middle of the night and talk to him, kind of more in a way that I guess might be more discreet, instead of running around and, being this Moabite woman and now she's trying to get at Boaz. Maybe in Naomi's mind, she was just wanting to do something that would be more protective of her. But yeah, for sure, if people woke up and saw Ruth there, it might look weird. I get that. But Ruth follows her instructions. There's a fly around here. Ruth follows Naomi's instructions on faith, knowing, okay, you told me what to do. I'm going to trust that this is okay. And then she also is having faith in Boaz's character too. I mean, in any context, whether we're talking, BC or 2020, a woman going into where a man is sleeping, after he's been kind of like partying or whatever, and laying down next to him seems weird. Like we get that it seems weird. Someone like a man of bad character obviously could take advantage of that situation. Then and now. Period. The kind of man that would not take advantage of that situation is someone who has integrity and someone who has character. We've already seen Boaz's character a whole bunch. We see it again right here. So Boaz could have skipped the whole kinsman redeemer process in the way that God instructed, and he could just be like, oh, cute girl here, younger than me. I like her. I'm just going to take her for myself, like sexually or whatever. He could do that. And again, since we know this is the time of the judges, even Jewish men, even Jewish people who said they followed God were not following God. They were not being loving. They were not being people of integrity. So Boaz, if he were some other dude, could have done that. He did literally the opposite. He respected Ruth a ton, did not take advantage of her even a little bit. Instead, he was very, very kind. So, he was wealthy and powerful, could have done what he wanted, but he didn't. He was deeply respectful. He waited. And we see in his response, he wanted to do the proper thing, which is why he said, hey, I would love to redeem you, but there actually is someone else. And we'll get to that in a second. So hopefully that makes sense. Ruth was not going to be creepy. There was a plan that she was enacting. Naomi was not wanting her to go be creepy. She was just doing some funny matchmaking and being a little sneaky about it. So that's essentially that. Any questions on that part of verse 3? And then I like the next question on verse 3. Just kind of like contextual, I guess. What did they use for perfume? Someone asked. Essentially, similar to what we do now, scented oils. It's just like not as concentrated as we have in like a perfume bottle now. But I don't know if any of you guys are into like essential oils and stuff. I mean, some people roll that like on their wrists. So more like that, just like we think about essential oils today, just scented oils. So when she was anointing her with oil, she was like putting on perfume. Probably some of your translations actually say perfume. So that makes sense. That's the second part of verse 3. Very easy. It's like essential oils that smell good. Okay, verse 4 and verse 7, these are kind of connected. Like the little slashes in your handout in the notes guide, those are all different questions. So that means a bunch of you guys asked about this. Like, what the heck is going on with the uncovering of the feet thing? So weird. So I'm going to read those questions, but yeah, they're essentially asking either the same or very related questions here. So why does Naomi want Ruth to uncover Boaz's feet? I find it weird that she wants her to uncover his feet. Yeah, that makes sense. Why did Ruth need to wait till Boaz was in bed and uncover his feet before she laid down with him? Why did Ruth uncover Boaz's feet? Why would Naomi tell Ruth to go sneak into where Boaz is sleeping and uncover his feet? It seems weird and creepy. In verse 4, why does Ruth need to uncover Boaz's feet? Was this her way of flirting with him? It sounds like a plan to take advantage of him as the guardian. What was the overall purpose and significance of Naomi telling her to go spend the night with Boaz? And then obviously uncovering of the feet is involved in that. So, okay, this has the most questions, rightfully so. Just to start off, the term uncover his feet, it literally just means uncover his feet. Like someone sleeping, they have covers over their feet, just uncovering their feet. It's not a euphemism, it's not some weird thing. It just means to uncover your feet. She physically uncovered his feet. Then laying down next to his uncovered feet is then saying, I am coming into your presence. Your feet are uncovered. I want your covering over me. I want your protection over me. All of it is symbolic. All of it is. And it has to do with this, right? So the feet covering stuff is highly symbolic. In fact, we are going to go back to chapter 2, verse 12. When Boaz kind of mentions this concept when he's talking to Naomi for the first time. He is basically telling her she's awesome, and we see how you have been so faithful to your mother-in-law. Your reputation is good. And he says in verse 12, the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Later, Ruth, in chapter 3, Ruth will essentially recall that imagery and say, spread your garment over me, spread your covering over me, which is another way of saying spread your wings of covering over me. I want to take refuge in God, and I think that God is essentially allowing me to take refuge in him through you as my Redeemer. So there is a lot of symbolism there, covering, refuge, which have to do with provision, which have to do with protection, caring, all that type of stuff, loyalty. So again, you're writing down a whole lot more than just what I'm writing here, but this is just some specifics and to draw really terrible drawings like that. Okay, so let's keep going on this one. When Ruth says to Boaz who she is, after he says, "Who are you?" He gets startled. I mean, maybe he got cold and woke up because his feet are uncovered. But she says, "Who are you?" She says, "It's Ruth, your servant." And she says, "Spread your wings over me. You are Redeemer." His first response is not like, "What the heck are you talking about? Like, why are you here? Why are you being weird?" Not even a little bit. He knows what she is doing. He knows what she is saying. So we want to kind of look at that. I mean, that should give us pause as to, well, it seems like he knows what's going on here. He doesn't seem to think it's very creepy. In chapter 3, he says, in verse 10, his first response to her, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich." So implying like, okay, you are now allowing me to be the person to redeem you. You're not going to try to go seduce some other younger guy. She could do that, I guess. Not necessarily going to be guaranteed, but the point being, he's older than her. We know that. There's no implications that he is already married, though. Maybe he's a widower. Like, we don't know. There's no mention of his wife. There's no mention of him having kids, and there isn't in that chapter in the later text. So he seems very happy that she actually is inviting him to take part in this covenant of the levirate marriage. Like, he does not seem annoyed at all. He actually seems happy about it. And then he says, "Do not fear. I will do all that you ask." What did she ask? She didn't say anything except for, "Your Redeemer, spread your wings over your servant." That's it. That concept of spreading your wings over your servant, like, her calling herself a servant, saying like, "Hey, I'm coming, in humility," essentially is what she's saying. All of that is symbolic. He knows what that means. Covering it, all the things we talked about earlier, buying the field, taking her as his wife, caring for her and Naomi until she dies, like all of those things, all of that is wrapped up in that phrase. So when he says all that you ask, it looks like she only asked one thing. He knows what she's asking. She did ask a lot, and he is saying, "I want to do that for you." But there's a problem. So we will talk about that in a second. I want to make it very, very clear, because someone asked about them taking advantage of him as their guardian. No, not even a little bit. She was inviting him to take his role as Redeemer. He doesn't have to say yes, and we'll see that in chapter 4. There is an offering. He can just say no. Granted, someone needs to say yes if they're going to actually love this woman who God wants to be protected and cared for, but it's not an obligation. It's very clear he wants to, though, because he then says, "I want to do this, but there's someone even closer in relation to Naomi or Elimelech. We have to let that guy know first that you are available. You need a Redeemer. If he wants to redeem you, he has first choice to marry you before I do." He, again, is showing his integrity and wanting to do it the right way. So that's pretty cool. Okay. Moving on to verse 7, I think we already answered this, but on your notes, you still need to have it. If you already typed it out thoroughly, you can go ahead and copy and paste, because you're not plagiarizing. You're just copying your own words into another section. Why did Boaz go lay in a grain pile? Towards the end of verse 7, it talks about that. He has money and food. Why doesn't he lay in a bed? Why was Boaz sleeping in a pile of grain? He wasn't sleeping in the pile of grain. He was sleeping near the pile of grain, and it was because of the end of the wheat harvest celebration. He was staying there to protect it, to make sure no one came and stole it after all the hard work that they had done for the past few months. And since he's the owner of the field, he's not just making his workers stay there. He is staying there himself because he is in charge of all of it. So that's why he is there. So that is verse 7. Okay. I feel like I'm going fast. Maybe I'm not, but if you guys have a question, make sure you put it in the chat box. You guys are always way quieter than the seniors. Over the live streams, not in real life. Okay, we'll move on then if you guys don't have anything else. Okay. Verses 8 through 10. Why doesn't Boaz think it's weird that Ruth knew where he was and snuck to lay down with him? Is this normal back then? Again, we've already answered that question, I believe. He knew what she was doing. That's why his first response to her is to say, to be blessed. May the Lord bless you. I want you guys to take notes on this in a kind of metaphorical way here. It's customary stuff. So to use that word, it's a Jewish custom. If we were in class, I would ask you guys, like, what are some customs, that we have in America, whether revolving around romance or friendship or jobs, I don't know, that might be weird to another culture or another culture's customs that might seem weird to us. I've been watching, as you probably are, a little more Netflix than normal when I go, at night. My ritual is to, sit in bed with my husband and watch Netflix, watch a show or two. And so we're just kind of going through them quickly because I actually don't watch TV that much normally, but so I'm watching a little bit more. And we've been watching some like British stuff, like BBC stuff, and it still like trips me out a little bit when they greet people, like they kiss each other on the cheek every single time, like that. I'm sure you guys have seen that. Maybe they do that in France too. I don't know. But, like, these shows aren't taking place in, like, the 50s. This is stuff that still happens today, whether it be acquaintances or whatever. Like, I can't imagine doing that, to my best girlfriends necessarily. I'm not saying that would be necessarily awkward. It's just, why would you do that? It just is not a thing we do. But, we're talking about members of the opposite sex who are married. There's nothing weird about the kiss on either cheek for that culture and that society. Not even a little bit. As an American, still seems weird to me. I've never done that before. Even the symbolism of like the custom, when someone is asking someone to marry them, they get down on one knee. Why? Where did that come from? I don't know. You could probably look it up on Wikipedia or something. The internet's awesome for that stuff. But other cultures don't do that. There's other ways of asking someone to marry them. And so what Ruth is basically doing is low-key proposing to Boaz, but like asking him to ask her to marry him in like this roundabout way that is very respectful and very understandable. He knows what she's doing. So that's why verse 8 through 10, it was not weird. He did not think it was weird. He actually was very flattered. Like, wow, you want to marry me, a low-key old guy? Oh my gosh. He was happy about it. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. In your notes for that one, you are going to need to have an example of a weird custom that either Americans do or another culture does that might seem different, odd, strange to another culture for your notes for that one, because it is a custom. Okay, verse 9. Why was Boaz surprised to see Ruth? Didn't he know she was? He says, who are you? It was dark. It was super dark. It's not like they had lights so you could just flick on a light. They were kind of outside, but like under a covering. So at least that's what the tradition would say, because that's how most threshing floors were. So he didn't see her. And even if there was lights, have you guys ever been woken up like immediately, like really fast or startled, and your eyes have to adjust, whether it's dark or light? You're like, what's going on? I mean, it's just kind of understandable. He just got woken up. He's startled. He can't see her. It's super dark. So he asks who it is. And then when she says it's Ruth, he's like, oh, okay. So he just couldn't see her. That is that part for verse 9. And then another one for verse 9. What does the word garment mean in this verse? Ruth uses that word when talking to Boaz. Why did he give her, and then another person asked, why did he only give her the corner of the garment, not the whole garment to cover herself with? Okay. Because it wasn't about like keeping her warm, it was about the symbolism of him saying, I'm going to cover you with my provision and my protection and, my hand in marriage. And so that it was a symbolic act. It wasn't like here, keep warm. Also in, chapter 2, verse 12, when Boaz says, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, again, we're talking about that being, God. The word wings can also mean corners of a garment. Like the same word is used there. And so, depending on who's translating it, obviously when we're talking about Ruth and Boaz, it's literally a corner of a garment, but the symbolism is the same. And so I just think that that's interesting. In that verse, the word for wings can also mean corners of a garment. kind of cool there. There was something else I was going to say about that, but I kind of forgot. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, verses, we only have like a few more. Okay. Hope you guys are tracking, not seeing a whole bunch of conversation. Hopefully you guys are still alive. And then you're watching and you can upload this immediately afterwards, and then you don't have to worry about anything else in my class until next week. So we are moving on to another kind of important section, verses 12 through 13. And so there was a few questions on this also. Oh, someone asked something. 4 verses 8 through 10, what did you want us to give an example of? Of a custom from a culture that seems strange to another culture, because the question was about it being weird that Ruth would go and lay at his feet, and that whole thing that she did that Naomi told her to do. I need you guys to have an to answer the question. No, it wasn't weird because blah, 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 blah. For example, I gave the example of like British cultures doing the kiss greeting, or in American cultures, or I guess Western cultures in general, the getting on one knee to ask someone to marry you. That's not the same, in other cultures. So I just was asking you guys to give an example. I gave you 2. You could use one of those, and how that might be different to another culture. Just like this is different to us. And most of you guys thought it was super creepy. Understandably so, because I don't think any of you guys will be proposing to someone by coming and lying at their feet and covering yourself with a garment or whatever. Yeah, not something that happens today. Okay, good question. We're good? Verses 12 through 13. This is a fair question. Like, clearly Boaz is into Ruth. He already said yes, so why is Boaz saying, oh yeah, but there's another guy. I gotta make sure, about this guy. Why was Boaz willing to let another guy take Ruth, but then take her back if he said no? This confuses me. Did they only marry for wealth and gaining something, not love? I put the other question next to this one about guardian redeemers because it has to do with that concept. So there, with this kinsman redeemer, there's like an order, So we got closest, if I spelled that right. Closer. Even closer. Or that would be even closer. This is regular closer. And this is close guy. Okay. There is a line down of people who can potentially be this kinsman redeemer, okay? So if the guy has a brother, that would be the closest. And if the brother is unmarried, that makes the most sense. Okay, you're going to marry the woman. We already talked about that. So really good questions on that one. What was the whole deal? That's why I started this entire session with talking about the concept of kinsman redeemer, levirate marriage. So again, if you want to copy and paste your notes from earlier, or if you need to go back and listen to it, that is really answering this question about what guardian redeemers did. Are they supposed to marry widows? Yes. What's the purpose knowing about a guardian redeemer? Because it's what this entire book is about. What does a guardian redeemer mean specifically? I answered that question at the beginning of this video. But it's all this stuff, and we'll talk about it. So essentially, we don't know where Boaz is in this line. We just know he's not here. He's not the closest. He might be here, he might be here, he might be here. But all we know is that he is not the closest redeemer to Naomi or Elimelech. Therefore, the person who is closer in relation gets first dibs, essentially. Like, hey, you want to marry this girl, but then, again, you have to take on her debt, and you have to take on Naomi, and you have to take on all this other stuff. But Boaz is trying to, again, be a godly man, be a man of integrity. That's why he's willing to let another guy take Ruth, but then take her back if he said no. I said this with the seniors, and it's probably a bad analogy, but I can't think of a better one. Like, if you have two people who are, like, wanting to get married or something, and maybe someone wants to, like, get into medical school or, go be a lawyer or do something that they feel, we've talked about this with boundaries in dating too. Do something that they feel, I feel like I'm called to do this, like God wants me to do this. Someone who really might, selflessly love the other person, say, hey, I want to be with you. But if you feel like you're called to go be a missionary to Africa and go live a single life or whatever, and you feel like you want to do that, that is fine. I want you to do what is right in obedience to God's command, like with this situation here. But if for some reason that doesn't work out, I still want you, you know. Now we can of course say you don't want to wait forever. I'm just talking in like the interim, in the meantime, that would be the closest example I can think of, is saying I want what's right for you. I want what God wants for you. If there's someone closer in relation to Elimelech who is supposed to marry you and he wants to do that, I will trust God's plan. I will trust that he's taken you this far. You know, he's brought you to me for a reason. Maybe I was just in your life for a reason. I'm going to trust that God will have it in his hands, and whatever's best for you will go down. So that's what Boaz is saying. It's not like he doesn't like her. It's not like he doesn't want to marry her. He's just trying to not be a creep about it. He's trying to not be sketchy about it. He's trying to have integrity. So that's why he's willing to let another guy take Ruth. But then say, but if that guy says no, I'm here. I'm down to marry you. So to reiterate in this question, we only have 3 more after this, and those are all real short, actually. I wanted to make it really clear, because someone asked about, you know, are you only marrying for wealth and gaining something, not love? We have a really screwed up view of actually what love is in 2020 in our Western society. Like, if we're going to have from a godly perspective or a Christian perspective, love is about selflessness. Love is about loyalty. Love is about faithfulness. You know, love is about character. Not about how you feel or how cute someone is or how much you want to make out with them. And so both Ruth and Boaz have already seen the type of character that even in 2020 we should want in a spouse. Things like commitment to God, loyalty to family, integrity, honesty, faithfulness, commitment, hard work. Like, we've seen all that in both of them. And they've like taken turns kind of like complimenting each other and saying like, you're amazing, and like, God bless you, and like very sweet, you know, God-centered language towards each other. So it's very clear that they both have at least some type of admiration for each other and affection for each other. So it would be really kind of lame of us to assume that Ruth doesn't even want to marry Boaz. In her language, it seems like she does too. So no, this doesn't have to do with wealth and gaining something necessarily. Of course, Naomi and Ruth want to be provided for and taken care of, for sure. I mean, who doesn't want that? Like, in general, no one wants to be lonely necessarily. People want companionship and community. But really, like, love has to do with protection and provision and caring and selflessness and putting someone's needs before your own. Those aren't separate things. And so this situation is literally a win-win for everyone here. Naomi, Ruth, Boaz. They respect each other already. They like each other's character. And yeah, a guardian redeemer would then have to take on debts and things like that if they decide to marry the person. So they get out of poverty. Boaz or whoever gets godly wife. Like, again, win-win for everyone. So not about selfishness, not about marrying for wealth. There is not anything to indicate in here that they aren't actually into each other. It seems like they are, and it seems like they're into each other for godly reasons, not because, you know, Ruth is hot. Like, there's nothing in this that says, like, Ruth is beautiful. There's nothing in this that says Boaz is beautiful. They just very much respect each other's character. And that makes a good husband. I mean, even, oops, I bumped the desk. I said this to the seniors, and we're almost done here, but like, even today, like, even in 2020, what's the point of having a hot husband if you don't trust him? Like, to care about you, to not be abusive, to not cheat on you, to not ignore you. Like, it would be stupid. You know, he might be fun to kiss or whatever, but like, if you don't trust his character and his integrity, bad idea. And that's the same then and the same now. So hopefully that answers that question. There was a lot of questions with that one. Okay, the next few are really simple, really, really short. Verse 12 asks, who is the guardian redeemer that's more closely related to Ruth, and how does he know about Ruth? How does he know about Ruth needs help? Okay, well, how does he know that Ruth needs help? 1, we don't know yet. We don't know this guy. We won't find out until chapter 4. 2, he doesn't know that Ruth needs help. And he doesn't know until Boaz tells him. At least that's how it seems in chapter 4. And we'll get to chapter 4 next week. So we don't know who he is, and he doesn't necessarily know that Ruth needs help. Boaz is going to tell him because that's what he should do, to let this guy know. I mean, like, that would kind of suck if he just decided to marry Ruth and just like, oop, I'm not going to tell this guy, and then he finds out. That would be very bad. That would not be a good look for Boaz, who's trying to be a man of integrity and have character. Verse 14. Why didn't Boaz want others? Oh, this is a good question. Why didn't Boaz want others to know that Ruth came to his room and sat on his floor? Well, she lay there too. But since Boaz wanted Ruth to not be seen by anyone, was it scandalous of Ruth to sleep by Boaz? Are women not allowed at the threshing floor? Why are women not allowed to be on the threshing floor? And did the men know Ruth went to the threshing floor? Okay, a lot of good questions all about Ruth going down to the threshing floor. There's nothing necessarily indicating that women aren't allowed there, like it's off limits for women. But since it was the workers who were there, there's no indication that women were there. So I don't know about your translations. Mine doesn't say anything about women not being there, but he just said don't let it be known that a woman came down there. Because the men were partying and, hanging out and having a good time, like a dude time, like, look, we did it. We did the harvest. It's not implied that women aren't there then. Like, it's not maybe like it's off limits to them, but during this time, they didn't seem to be there. Women didn't seem to be there. First of all, yes, it might look weird, but not because it's inappropriate. There is a passage, I want to say it's in 1 Thessalonians, I could be wrong, where like Paul talks about not having an appearance of evil. Now, obviously, we cannot run around and like live our lives in fear of people or what people are going to say, but at the same time, like, you don't also want to be a dummy. Like, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where it looks like you're doing something stupid or immoral, especially. That's kind of what Boaz is saying here. Nothing bad happened. Like, there's nothing to indicate that anything, inappropriately sexual or immoral happened while Ruth was there. In fact, it seems again that there was integrity and character and things. But Boaz doesn't want there to be any rumors. So it seems like maybe he was saying to another guy that had been there, because it doesn't say he said to Ruth. It just says, he said, don't let it be known that there is a woman who came. Because nothing happened, and it would be better for that rumor to not go out. Hey, did you hear that Ruth was down there? Like, of course nothing happened, but it still is better to use discernment and not have that rumor even start in the first place. Boaz is yet again protecting Ruth, her reputation. He doesn't want it to be tainted for any reason. Could they run around and say, hey, she was asking me to be her redeemer? Sure, but again, we know there's another redeemer, so then we don't want that to actually get out. That they're trying to, that it might look like they were trying to jump the gun or anything like that. And so he is just trying to protect Ruth and her reputation because nothing bad happened. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it. He wanted to know Ruth he was interested, which is why he didn't say, hey, leave. He told her, I'm interested, but we have to do this the right way. And so that's what was going on there. Okay, question. How are the guardian redeemers supposed to know if someone in their family needs their help? Because essentially this reason, you would have to go around and try to find out where they are. You would only know if someone's living somewhere by word of mouth. So, like we read in chapter 1, Ruth happened to stumble upon Boaz's field. Naomi in her mind knows Boaz exists. Maybe this guy exists. Maybe she forgot. We don't know. They're not in like a tiny little town. Like it's a city, like, all of Judah or all of Bethlehem. And so it's only when Ruth comes back and says to Naomi, oh yeah, I was in the field of Boaz. Naomi's like, light bulb. I mean, she's old again. Oh my gosh, Boaz, who owns a field. He is a relative of Elimelech. That means he's a guardian redeemer. Because to try to go and like find a person would be kind of silly. They would have to travel. It's not like they had phones, Ruth and Naomi probably didn't even have donkeys. We don't know. There's nothing to imply that they had a means of traveling at all. They didn't have wealth much at all. And so we don't know how they were able to communicate with people besides travel and walk forever to a field, And then she happened to stumble upon Boaz. So Naomi might know in the back of her head, hey, I think there's a guardian redeemer here, and there's one who used to be living here. But it's been 10 years. I mean, even today, people move around so much. Like, people moved around then too. It would just take a lot longer. And there's no way of communicating who was there still besides word of mouth. So maybe Naomi had been putting out feelers. We don't know. But there's no way for her to just magically know and then try to go find that person, to go travel. She shouldn't travel alone. For her to take Ruth to try to travel and possibly find someone that might be able to redeem them, to take her away from her, gleaning of getting food. Like, all of it's a risk. And so it would be hard, Maybe if they had donkeys and they could ride around a bunch or had more people, they could. And so Boaz is the one who's been living in Judah and Bethlehem for 10 years. Boaz is the one who says, hey, actually, there's still someone living here who is a closer relative of Naomi and Elimelech's. So he has to get first dibs. So they didn't know because they hadn't been living there. And the guardian redeemers wouldn't know unless someone told them. So that's a good question, though, Hannah. Really, really good question. That's why the story keeps unfolding. Last one, verse 18. What did Naomi mean when she said, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. So after Ruth comes back and tells her everything that happened, Naomi's like, all right, sweet. By the end of today, she's going to have a redeemer. She's going to have someone who will take her and take care of us, and we will be okay, finally. So big, deep breath. All she means is, like, clearly Boaz is into you. Clearly he wants to marry you, and he cares about you. It's not even just about him getting to marry you. He cared about you before he knew he was a redeemer, or before you brought it to his attention or reminded him. He's saying, I'm going to take care of this. I will make sure of it, whether it be me or Joe Schmo over here. Someone is going to take care of you, which is why Naomi says, you know, he's into you. Don't worry. You know, this is going to be taken care of. You can sit tight, and we're going to be okay. And so that's what she's essentially saying. The man will not rest until the matter is settled. As in, he's not going to, like, go back to his normal life and be like, well, I'll do that later. No, he's going to go find that guy, tell that guy, hey, Ruth and Naomi are here. Ruth needs a redeemer. You want to do it? If not, you know, I'm next in line. And that's chapter 4. So you have a bunch of foreshadowing there. Again, you guys have until exactly 24 hours until tomorrow, Friday, to submit your notes. There shouldn't really be much work involved besides just typing out your notes. I didn't want to have you guys do, you know, like homework stuff. This is just like something that we do in class. And that's it. And then you just upload to Schoology and you won't have anything else from me until next week. Before I sign off for you guys, any final questions about this chapter? It says that there's 6 of you on here. I would love to just have one more, like either a thumbs up or I got it or cool or bye or something in the chat box so that I know that it makes sense. Like I asked you guys in class, like nod or thumbs up or something so that I know you guys are tracking with me and that you understand the chapter better than before. So if you guys could do that, once I see all that, then I'm going to click it off. Obviously, I'm available. Caroline, thank you. And then whoever was not able to join, you will watch this video. Taya, thank you. Let's see if these show up. Can you guys see this? Kind of. Maybe I lost some of you. It says 6 of you are watching, but only Caroline and Taya have said anything after I said. All right, well, thank you guys for participating. Those of you who are here and watching, I appreciate it. And if you have any questions, let me know. All right, I'm going to try to find the mouse so I can click off of the live stream. There we go. Bye, guys.